One thing about security is that it has a outside actor.
When it comes to transaction, anonymous transaction using bitcoins. And I
Uh-huh.
think this got the real hype when Silk Road was live between 2011 and 2013.
And Silk Road is a great example, right? You could preserve anonymity and you could buy drugs and guns and murder for hire, which of course is always going to be there. Being anonymous opens a door to misbehavior.
Which are the some industries and sectors you think that decentralization will make a huge impact?
I I don't think it will. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Meta's new Twitter competitor is supposed to be decentralized. I don't see what benefit that gets them. People who have to pay the ransomware to get their data back are indicating they're not doing just the fundamental requirement of an IT department, which is back up all the systems all the time. Twitter went live and they had horrible security. This industry is changing so fast. After 6 months of being involved in the industry, you will have more experience than 50% of the people in the industry.
Your journey in cybersecurity started in 1995, and it has been 28 years since you have been into this industry. Just want to hear from you about this journey.
Sure. Yeah, 28 years ago, there were no cybersecurity programs at universities. And what was exciting to me was that everybody who got into it was new to it. And I used to tell people who thought they may have been too late to get into it that, you know what, this industry is changing so fast. After 6 months of being involved in the industry, you will have more experience than 50% of the people in the industry. And those numbers probably aren't the same anymore. And now there are programs you can take to learn the basics. And at the time, I was actually a mechanical engineer who had started a ISP. Excuse me, and an ISP is very closely related to security. So when I did join a MSSP, that's where I learned security from day one. I'm a real believer in learning networking. There's almost two technical paths: networking and endpoint, and then you can branch off from there. But now networking gives you the fundamentals of how the internet works, and obviously how attackers see the internet and see their targets. I was at an MSSP and helped out a PricewaterhouseCoopers on an engagement with Volkswagen. So the next time I was looking for a job, PwC was more than happy to hire me, and that gave me solid 2 to 3 years of engaging in security assessments, literally pen testing, but some of the biggest companies in the world, so Dell and BNSF Railroad and People's Gas and SunTrust Bank. And that exposure to what we think of as the enterprise was super valuable. And Gartner valued that and brought me on board as an industry analyst. I was the second industry analyst covering network security at Gartner. The first one was John Pescatori, who's now he's over at SANS. And talk about trial by fire, right? As a industry analyst, you're talking and giving advice to CIOs at the time. Now today it would be CISOs, and answering all their questions and knowing through that process of having a dozen calls a day with them that you understand their problems, what they're looking at. That gives you unique insights into the industry. So that's pretty much how I became a industry analyst, and quickly discovered that was my area, right? I love data, and I love hearing from startups. I love helping establish vendors, strategize on their go-to-market. I love working with CISOs on, just their product strategies, what they should be using to address a particular threat actor. It's just, of course, the industry is just grown and growing.
Yeah. So when you got started in cybersecurity back in 1995, what was it like compared to how you see it today?
Oh my gosh. So in 1995, when you talk to people about security, they'd say, yeah, I'm just a automotive manufacturer. What do I need security for? This was before massive attacks against consumers, credit card theft and all the rest that happened 10 years later. This is before we knew that there were nation state sponsored attacks. China was actually, at least according to their academic reporting, was engaged in cyber attacks in 95 timeframe. But the rest of us didn't recognize that. We didn't see it. We didn't have the tools. If you think about it, the cuckoo's nest or cuckoo's egg was written, 10 years before that. And that was, such an interesting attack, right? Over dial-up modems, trying to steal secrets from Berkeley labs. And obviously, the one thing about security is that it has a outside actor, and it's the threat actor, and that drives the industry, right? If they would just pack their bags up and go home, the industry would, just stop improving. But we have to constantly improve. And I think that's what makes it exciting for people who get into security is that feeling of an adversary on the other end of the network connection who wants to do harm to you. And so you really take it personally. It takes it out of the 9 to 5, go into my job, do my job, go home, and into an all-consuming way of living. And it's stressful. The stress never ends, but it's also rewarding because you're fighting a good battle.
So as the threat actors grow, the industry will keep growing. And I
Yeah,
totally agree with that. And back in those days, there were not many opportunities, there were not many technologies in place compared to what we see today.
that's for
And
sure.
among these technologies, one of which I wanted to talk about is the decentralization technology. And the first thing that comes to our mind when we hear decentralization is the blockchain. So, what are your takes on decentralization technology and what do you think about it?
Yeah, it's decentralization in general has been tried over and over. You may recall peer-to-peer file sharing, which was actually a way for people to share, stolen intellectual property. And obviously a great way to get movies and code and stuff like that. And it was developed to bypass the controls at network gateways. I don't think blockchain has come close to delivering on its promise. It was going to change the world. We were going to break our bond with banks that charge fees for every transaction. It was going to be a beautiful thing, but it has anonymization in it. And anytime you mix money with anonymization, you get money laundering and bad things happening. So it didn't happen fast enough, right? There was no, hey, the U.S. Federal Reserve is shutting its doors because the fiat currencies are being displaced by blockchain. If that had happened, we'd be in a different world. It didn't happen, took too long. Regulators started recognizing it and started imposing restrictions to the point where, I can't even pay a contractor in Pakistan using Bitcoin or Ethereum, just because there's too many restrictions and the big exchanges are too worried about regulation or fines. So there just isn't working. In the security space, people recognize how a distributed ledger like blockchain could have all these benefits. And so I see proposals and companies getting funded and startups all the time that are going, we're going to fix the password problem with a blockchain. We're going to fix contracts with the blockchain. And it just never takes off, because the one thing you have to realize is that if something is good enough, then that's what people gravitate towards. And just look at, hey, come on, a digital signature should be a cryptographic element, encapsulating a hash of the message. That technology is 25 years old, and it should be great for all this stuff. And yet, when digital signatures became a thing, DocuSign won that, right? The digital signature there is just a record. It's not your signature. It's just a little scrawl that looks like your signature. But there's a record, and that's the thing. Contracts do not rely on the signatures. They rely on both parties agreeing to something. It's just I remember learning that in the United States, where our laws are really determined by case law, right? How they're executed in practice. There's only been a single case ever of somebody contesting a signature in court, right? Is like nobody ever says, hey, you signed this, and the other person says, no, I didn't sign it, and then it goes to court. It's only happened once in 200 years of case law. So yeah, DocuSign's perfectly fine. We don't need a distributed smart contract chain to make it work. And that's, yeah. So obviously I'm not a big fan of blockchain for anything other than financial transactions.
When it comes to anonymous transaction using Bitcoins. And I think this got the real hype when Silk Road was live between 2011 and 2013.
Yeah.
So what do you think about it? Like, how did people, got to know more and more about it when Silk Road was live?
Yeah. Silk Road is a great example, right? You could preserve anonymity, and you could buy drugs and guns and murder for hire, which of course is always going to be there. Just like online transactions were actually driven by pornography sites, right? They needed a way to accept money from people all over. And PayPal eventually won that battle. And Bitcoin would have been perfect for that, right? Completely anonymous transactions, don't have to reveal your end users, don't have to know who they are. I think being anonymous opens a door to misbehavior, as we all see on Twitter, right? There's plenty of anonymous Twitter accounts that say really nasty things, untruthful things all the time. Reddit, same thing. If you get in the wrong community on Reddit, you're just eviscerated anonymously. But look at the solutions that aren't anonymous, like LinkedIn, where you can see a person's complete profile. If they want to come after you, they're doing it in a public venue and staking their reputation on their behavior. And so it's much calmer and easier place to do business. So I think that's the issue. It's how do you establish reputation in a anonymous environment? And obviously with blockchain you can start measuring and have a score of how many transactions you've completed and all the rest. But you can skirt the law if law enforcement can't find out who you are.
So right now, decentralization technology is being adopted by many industries and sectors. But which are the some industries and sectors you think that decentralization will make a huge impact?
I don't think it will. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I don't think decentralization is going to help. I'm confused over why Meta's new Twitter competitor is supposed to be decentralized. I don't see what benefit that gets them. That was, I don't know, it was viewed as a solution to the Twitter problem. But I think just good governance and policies are all that Twitter needs and all that a messaging platform needs. You don't need to decentralize it.
Okay. So now I would like to know all about IoT devices. As we are seeing, the use case of these types of devices are rapidly increasing. So with the growth of these types of devices, we give birth to new types of threats. So
Yep.
how do you look at these IoT devices from a security perspective, and how can we make these types of IoT devices, a more safe?
Yeah, uh, IoT is one of the things that was easy to predict where we'd be today, which is billions of devices with both no security and no way to make them secure. And so a whole new realm of endpoints, basically, that need everything else that we've always had for our laptops and desktops and cell phones for that matter. And so therefore I broke in my own coverage, I broke it out. IoT security is a separate thing. It has a different buying center, right? So you quite often it's not the IT department that buys IoT security. It's the operations department, the owners of the IoT devices. And so they need endpoint security. So, but the devices, don't have large enough operating systems to put an agent on them and do the same thing we do on our phones or our desktops. So other means have to be applied. One of them is patching, update the firmware often, and that is doable. That's just a bookkeeping and management problem. You might have 300,000 devices in a large hotel chain, for instance. You just have to discover them, which is similar to asset management in the traditional IT space. You have to, reset the passwords on all of them from the default password, and which is password management, and then you have to update them, continuously. As soon as firmware update's available, test it on a few devices, then push it out to everybody. All doable stuff. But some things can't be patched, right? If it provides a critical function in a manufacturing plant, it's too dangerous to patch it. So you have to isolate it. So it will become vulnerable to an attack, but you have to isolate it. So that means gateway devices, things that create a solid wall between the operational environment and the IT environment, which is ultimately connected to the internet. And you do that with, digital diodes, things that will strip. If you need to get information out of OT, you want to get that data without ever transmitting, network protocols. So you strip off all the data from the packets, re-encapsulate them on the other side of a data diode, and then push it out to the management console or something. You need identity and access management. You need network monitoring, so you can sit on the network without interfering with any of the devices and identify when a glitch happens. So it's huge industry. It's got 107 vendors that have specific products for it, and I think it's just going to grow and grow.
So are there any specific industries and sectors that you believe are more vulnerable to cyber attacks?
It's nice because they self-identify by showing up in the news as being victims of ransomware. And you look at, if you try and classify those victims of ransomware, they are manufacturers, book printers. Last year, when I went to press with Secuirty Yearbook 2022, my printer got hit by ransomware. And the interesting thing was two things. One, they got the Heidelberg presses, which are offset presses, they got them up and running in 3 days because they're not digital. Their digital press took 3 weeks, but they recovered because they had backups. People who have to pay the ransomware to get their data back are indicating they're not doing just the fundamental requirement of an IT department, which is back up all the systems all the time and be in a place where you can recover data from those quickly. That predates the internet. Everybody always used to do a backup because computers are unreliable. And now you've got hackers that are making them even more unreliable. So it appears to be state and local governments, even federal agencies, at the national level, school systems, hospitals, people with, what I call security debt, right? If you're going to take advantage of digitalization, right, you're going to create an app for your reservation system or selling tickets online or any of those things, you are earning money without paying the tax of security. And you are going to have to pay that back. And you're going to either pay it back by quickly investing in cybersecurity people and processes and technology, or you're going to pay it back through increased fees to your cyber insurance company or fines for the data breach that you're going to suffer. And it's much, much better to invest the money now than potentially go out of business because of a cyber attack.
So, as you talked about ransomware, and recently we have heard the news that TSMC, the largest memory chip maker company, was hit by the ransomware, and the demand from the gang is $70 million. So, would you like to talk about TSMC a little bit? Where did they lack that it led them to these types of, facing these types of consequences?
Yeah, a manufacturer, even a chip manufacturer, is in that category of organizations that have underspent, right? It's like they've got a website, the risk of that being hacked isn't that big, or the damage from it being hacked isn't that big. It gets defaced, you take it down, whether because a chip manufacturer has dozen customers and they've got strong relationships with them, and they're almost offline compared to the rest of the world. So, but they, everybody wants to take advantage of digitalization. So they created an opening for an attacker. I think it's super unfortunate. They probably should not pay the ransom. Take that $70 million, would easily pay for a security program at a chip manufacturer and just reinvest it.
So the conclusion here is that we must invest in security and we must give it a good priority. And many,
Right.
yeah, and like right now, new businesses are starting, new startups are starting from all over the world, and they must prioritize security. That is the main point. Okay, so
Well, wait a minute.
now, okay,
Wait a minute.
okay,
We say that, but when you're doing a startup, your first goal is get your product to market and
yeah,
get your customers, right?
yeah, yeah.
And I think it's important to understand how much security is going to cost you. So certainly, be cognizant of the fact that your product has to be secure. You don't have to spend a lot on security. If everybody's using Linux and MacBooks, use cloud services for email, then you get the advantage of, Google's taking care of your email security for you. You're hosting in the cloud, you get Amazon in all of their defenses. So I don't think security should even be a line item on your budget when you're doing a startup, but it should be, part of your future spend, right? As soon as you have customer data, you've got to, treat that with confidentiality and protect it. And that's not hard to do. Don't need to invest millions of dollars to do it. You just have to be aware going forwards that you'll have that expense. I remember looking at Twitter. When Twitter went live, they got to 1 million users in the first 18 months. And they had horrible security, right? You could set up a new Twitter handle with no verification of your email even. You just register it and do it. And a whole bunch of celebrities got on, and a young man in Southern California ran a password cracker against their Twitter accounts and took them less than 24 hours to guess their password. They didn't even have rate limiting on how many times you can try and log into an account, right? Immediately afterwards, they did. And Twitter, for the longest time, was extremely successful. So they managed to, if you're on a fast enough growth curve, you can get ahead of it and then pay back the debt as they did, well before they're making money doing anything. So it's a careful balance between the two. You have to understand you don't want to introduce too much friction or you won't get 1 million users. But at the same time, you want to avoid when you're just coming up on 1 million users, all of a sudden becoming known as having no security. You have to react very quickly.
So as you spoke about cloud, so how secure is the cloud that you think?
I think the cloud is more securable than your own data center. That's because Amazon, Google, Microsoft have taken care of all the physical security for you. Most importantly, they have standardized the platforms you're going to be running on. So you're not going to, the developers are going to pick their favorite OS running on their favorite hardware reliant system, and incorporate all those different things in it. You're just going to pick from a very short menu from your cloud provider about what OS you're going to run, what size, etc. So that alone is, you've got the security basics covered. Amazon has 240 security tools that you can install, for marginal additional cost, right? They just provide them so that you use more compute time, right, using them. So very, very inexpensive. And of course, there's a couple hundred separate products, commercial products that you can buy. Quite a few of them have freemium options, and there's open source solutions that can tap into the cloud. So I think the cloud is made us more secure overall.
Okay. So now talking about AI, really it's a big thing. So it's creating a massive impact in every field possible right now. If we talk about, and advanced tools like ChatGPT have helped individuals, organizations with its accuracy of work, and it's also very less time consuming. So talking about cybersecurity, how can we use AI to leverage cybersecurity? And also, I would like to know that is it going to be more helpful from the defense side, or is it going to be more helpful for the offense side?
Yep. I am all in on artificial intelligence. I think this is the biggest thing that's happened in my lifetime from a technology perspective. This is it. If you're getting into security or getting into anything, jump on this bandwagon, learn everything you can about it, learn how to use it. Don't necessarily have an idea that takes $100 million to do. And, that's going to be hard to get through the noise. For cybersecurity, I think the positives far outweigh the negatives. And, the biggest problem facing cybersecurity teams is a data problem. There's too many alerts. Then everybody's struggling to figure out how to prioritize alerts and reduce alerts. AI is going to do that for us. It's going to be so easy for it. So, it might, I don't think it'll harm level 1 analysts in a SOC, because they will be able to leverage this and they'll become automatic level 2 analysts.
So these IDSs and IPS, are these systems going to be replaced by AI?
Not replaced, but made to have some value.
Okay.
Right now, IDS and IPS just spew alerts, and people tend to ignore them. They keep the alerts and log them, but they don't really use them. But with AI, you'll actually be able to do something with them.
So talking about trends in cybersecurity industry, there are always new trends coming in the industry. but you are an industry analyst, and I want to know from your perspective that are there any new cybersecurity trends that very less people are aware of?
There are a few areas, it's not a trend. Deception had its moment and is trending down, if anything. But I think deception is a fabulous technology for advanced teams for the most part. There's a trend on the part of attackers that hasn't been addressed yet, which is to corrupt the software update pipeline. There are a couple vendors that could help check software updates for vulnerabilities introduced or command and control communications introduced or backdoors introduced, but they don't market to it. So I think that's a future trend to look for, is solutions that deliver on that. So you don't have to just trust every update you get. As for the longest time, the answer to security was you should update as soon as the update's available. Just click yes and off you go. And obviously, when the update could be corrupt, you don't want to do that. As all the users in Ukraine of the accounting package that led to not taking down the country and a good part of Europe. You can't trust a software update ever again. And yet we are. I know I've updated software dozens of times since then. And you just, okay, hopefully I'm not patient zero.
Cybersecurity is a field that is always updating. There is always something new coming into this field. So I would like to know that as an industry analyst, how do you stay up to date with the recent trends in cybersecurity?
I do it by I created a platform to do that. I cover 3,502 vendors, and then I update the data on them every month. So I can look at what's growing, what's shrinking, which companies are suffering, and it also has a news ingestion feature where we pull news from 3.5 million websites, and I check that every day. And of course, LinkedIn is just a constant stream of interesting stuff. And then when there's a particular new vulnerability or new attack, then I go to Twitter, and that's where all the security practitioners will dig in and talk about the details and link to their proof of concept code. And so combination of all those resources.
Okay. So how do you recommend a beginner who is starting into cybersecurity to stay updated with the trends?
Yeah, I would follow InfoSec Twitter. Just start finding the people that contribute, the most knowledge to it. There are a bunch of great hackers, great researchers. Twitter's a really good place. The subreddit for cybersecurity is a little bit more about, getting a job and stuff like that, not news related. Go to Feedly and use their freemium version to decide which blog posts you want to read every month or every day as they come out. A lot of good material. Follow me on LinkedIn. I'm always posting industry news there.
Okay. The last question and the conclusion to this podcast. What advice would you like to give to someone who is getting started into cybersecurity, just stepping into the domain? What advice you would like to give him?
Yeah, I would focus less on getting your certified ethical hacking certificate. Those are not well-respected certificates, and they don't really give you a feel for what it's like to work in the industry. If you're after a certification, get the Cisco Certified Network Engineer certificate, which is offered in many high schools around the world. That gives you the best foundation for getting into security. And then look at opportunities to work for vendors of cybersecurity. There are 75 alone in India. There's 3,502 around the world. you can either take a marketing path there, or a sales path, or if you're technically minded, a sales engineer path, which is great exposure to the customers who are using a particular product. So lots of different ways to get into it.
Thank you so much for this amazing time that you have given us. A lot of things to learn from you. And we hope to see you again on this podcast, sir, because today I don't think it was enough talking about security. There is so much to talk about security. I'm really great to have you on this podcast, and I hope to have you again on my podcast. So thank you so much again.
Thank you, Sigil. Anytime.